Not that we need an excuse, but in a few days it's National Whiskey Sour Day, so today we're going to make a grapefruit coffee sour. And this recipe also uses an ingredient called an Imperfect Coffee Syrup, which is designed to reduce coffee waste and add really delicious coffee flavour to cocktails, which is what it's going to do today. So, without further ado, let's make some coffee cocktails. So, a sour. It typically contains a spirit, it contains an acidity, usually in the form of citrus juice, it contains a sweetener, and often something to add texture such as egg white or aquafaba. And this is a really good template for experimentation, which is what we're going to do today. Bringing in flavours of grapefruit and coffee, which just works so well together. In a second, I'll also show you how to make an ingredient which I'm really excited about, which is a kind of zero waste approach, which is called an Imperfect Coffee Syrup, which is the sweetener in our drink, and a really good way to use up any leftover coffee you might have, if that's a thing for you, or any kind of dial-in brews that aren't quite perfect. And it just brings a really nice body, coffee flavour to any drink you add it to. So at the core of our grapefruit coffee sour, we're going to need some rye whiskey. I'm using Woodford Reserve, but you can use your favourite rye or a bourbon, or a Scotch whiskey, an Irish whiskey, or even not whiskey at all, which we'll talk about in a second. For the acidity and sweetness, we're going to use two ingredients, which I'll talk more about later. We're going to use grapefruit juice, or ideally a freeze-distilled grapefruit juice, which is more concentrated and intensified. And then we're going to need our Imperfect coffee syrup. And then to this, I'm going to add 3 different seasonings from over here in my seasoning box. So first of all, we're going to go with the saline solution, which essentially is a 1 to 5 salt to water solution. We're also going to add vanilla extract, which brings that kind of subtle vanilla flavour. And then finally, we're going to go with some Seville orange bitters, or whichever orange bitters you can get your hands on. And these will really change the dynamic of the drink and bring it all together nicely. Our grapefruit coffee sour is going to be a shake and drink, so we're going to build it in a tin, starting with 50 mils of our rye whiskey. And this brings a really nice kind of spice character with those deep sort of toffee notes as well. And this is a really nice base, but if you want a less spicy drink, you could use bourbon, which is a little bit sweeter, or like I say, you could use any whiskey from around the world. Another thing you could do here is use a different spirit altogether, and I'll talk about that in a second. So next up, we're going to go 50 mils of our freeze-distilled grapefruit juice. And if you use fresh grapefruit juice without the freeze distillation, you're going to need to use quite a lot more of it, but then you'll end up with a waterier drink. So if you can use the freeze-distilled, this really does add a lot of value and that kind of intensity of grapefruit flavour and more acidity. I'll link exactly how to make this at the end of the video because it's 100% worth the effort. Next up, we're going to go with our Imperfect coffee syrup. And this is quite an interesting ingredient, which we're adding 20 mils of. Because a lot of the time we'll make coffee, we'll be dialing in a filter brew, and you'll taste it and it's just not quite right. What you can then do is add the same amount of sugar to the coffee you've brewed, and you'll make this really nice Imperfect coffee syrup. And just because the brew is not exactly perfect for drinking, doesn't mean it's not perfect for this. And it'll bring that really nice coffee character, a little bit of sweetness to the drink, and it just adds so much value and complexity to so many different drinks. You can also use different coffees and sugars in this to get different results. I'm using quite a chocolatey coffee and a muscovado sugar to get that kind of rich, round sweetness, whereas you could also use a really bright floral coffee, perhaps with a golden castor sugar, if you're going to make this drink with gin, which is also really, really delicious. You can use this in all manner of cocktails. It's a 1-to-1 syrup, so not quite as intense as a 2-to-1. If you're using a 2-to-1 syrup, you could obviously add a little bit less. But I like the 1-to-1 because you get plenty of coffee for the sweetness that you're adding, so you get a little bit more coffee flavour coming through. So now we've got our spirit, our acidity, and our sweetener. We're going to add our seasonings. And if you're not sure about seasoning cocktails, when you think about how people cook food, they do a great job of seasoning the food with salt, pepper, all sorts of flavours that accompany the food. But this approach isn't really taken for cocktails very often, which I think is a mistake. I think it can make drinks so much better. I just made a full video about this, which I'll link above, all about seasoning drinks and different ways you can do it. But we're going to go with 3 ingredients here today. We're going to go 1 gram of saline solution, made with 1 part salt to 5 parts water. We're going to go 1 gram of vanilla extract, which really ties in with the whiskey nicely, bringing some of those spice notes and kind of rounding it out a little bit, rather than being too bittersweet and intense, the spice. And then we're going to go 2 dashes, or 1 gram of orange bitters. And again, this does a similar thing, just brings a little bit more complexity, something a little bit different to the drink. And these 3 ingredients together, if you made the drink without them, it'd still be pretty delicious. But these 3 just elevate it and make the ingredients in there really pop. So in terms of the vanilla, this ties in with the whiskey really nicely and just brings those spices to the fore. In terms of the salt, this just bridges everything together. And then the bitters really make that grapefruit pop even further. You could easily stop here, shake it up and make a really delicious drink, but I quite like to add texture to my sour so you get that kind of creamy cascade and mouthfeel. And you could either add aquafaba, which is chickpea water, around about 15 to 20 mils of this, but we're just going to crack an egg into the drink today, just so it gets that really nice foamy texture. So I always recommend cracking your egg into the second tin, which doesn't have the liquid in, so you can see this is empty. just in case we get the egg yolk in there. We only want the white to go in the drink. So give it a little tap on the rim of your tin, and you just want to hold on to the bottom part of the egg so that the white comes out and then the yolk is left in the shell, which you can do things like make sauces with. All sorts of ingredients call for egg yolks, so try not to waste these if at all possible. Going to pass those from side to side, just releasing the white. Save the yolk for later. And then you just want to pass your white into the main drink, and we're going to give this a double shake. So technically this approach is actually a reverse double shake, where we shake with ice first and then without second. And I just find this really works to get that nice foamy texture in the drink whilst also chilling it and diluting it. So I'm going to give it a really good hard shake with ice to begin with. Then now this is really nice and cold, we're just going to pass this from the bigger shaker back into the smaller, straining out the ice. Then we'll give it a second shake without ice, just to really emulsify the drink and up that texture. Now we're just going to fine strain this into a frozen glass with lots of ice. Going to express some grapefruit zest over the drink, and then finish the drink with our grapefruit and a cherry on top. Why not? And there we have the grapefruit coffee sour. So, the grapefruit coffee sour. And if you're drinking this on National Whiskey Sour Day, happy National Whiskey Sour Day, and let's give it a sip. Everything I want in a sour. The whiskey is front and center, the coffee just lifts it up. The acidity from the grapefruit is really nice, and I do really recommend this freeze distilled grapefruit if you can, just because it pumps up that acidity quite a lot and the kind of intensity of flavor that you need. The texture from this is unbelievable. It's kind of pillowy and light and airy, and I think those seasonings have really done a lot here. The salt you don't taste, but everything tastes really good together, just like proper seasoning. The vanilla, again, very, very subtle. And then the orange bitters bring some kind of well-needed bitterness, which the coffee does bring a little bit, but that just kind of rounds it all out really nicely. Just a really tasty drink. So if you enjoy this, you might also enjoy this video, which is a clarified coffee sour, which takes it in a completely different direction texturally. And if you want to learn how to make this freeze distilled grapefruit juice, you can click here. If you want to subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this, you can click here. And I'm going to go back and have a bit more of this. Cheers everyone. Thanks for watching.